ToolCASE, the retail banking industry's preferred choice for real-time risk management and fraud detection.
Hey, good afternoon, everybody. Sam Piccolotti with ToolCASE, coming to you with another ToolCASE FraudCAST episode. And my guest, or co-host, I should say today, again, the godfather of cybercrime and well-known and respected Brett Johnson. Brett Johnson, I don't know that we need to keep reminding folks who you are, but we'll do it anyway. Brett Johnson was responsible for refining modern financial crime, cybercrime as we know it today, after being placed on the United States Most Wanted list, captured, convicted of 39 felonies. Brett promptly escaped prison, captured again. Brett served his time, accepted responsibility, and found redemption through his loved ones and the help of the FBI. Today he's considered one of the leading authorities on internet identity theft and cybercrime. Also the founder and proprietor of Anglerfish and several other mediums. You could find Brett Johnson at anglerfish.com. Is that correct?
That is correct. Anglerfish, ANGLERPHISH.com.
Awesome. Good to see you again, buddy.
Hey, you know, it's always great to be here. Sam, what have you been doing? Everything going all right?
Things are good. Yeah, it's summer,
All right.
you know, getting out and enjoying myself for sure. And
so now you tell me we've got a great guest today.
We do. Yeah, really excited. You know, ToolCASE is proud to be able to announce that in recent months we've partnered with Allied Insurance Group. Allied has been a leading entity in the fidelity bond business for both banks and credit unions on a national basis, in addition to insurance they provide. And they are top of mind in helping with risk and fraud prevention with their clients. As an added value of what they do on the bond work and the credit union and bank side for mitigating risk and preventing fraud. And our guest, Ann Davidson, is the VP of Risk Consulting, started in the industry working with credit unions and banks in 1974. She just a little one back then, but full of knowledge. She has had a passion to help detect and prevent and mitigate all types of fraud and risk exposure for credit unions and banks around the country. And I will say that, Brett, as you may have been domed the godfather of cybercrime, I would have to say that Ann Davidson is probably worthy of the title of godmother of fraud prevention.
I like it.
Ann Davidson, welcome.
Thank you, Sam. And Brett, it's great to meet you as well. And I look forward to this today. Yeah, fraud is top of mind for everybody. So thank you for this great opportunity.
I was just,
hey.
Brett, I want to show you, I know you're a celebrity, but Ann holds right up there. I'd been cleaning out my desk earlier and dusted off an article that I was reading here in Credit Union Times, where Ann spoke about balancing member service with transaction risk prevention from April of 2019. So, Ann, big fan, as you know.
Thanks, Sam. A lot of fraud.
I'm excited to hear you guys talk and collaborate today and get a conversation going. I know our guests certainly going to find a lot of value and interest in what's being discussed. And Ann Davidson, may I also add, if folks wanted to reach you, what's the best way to do that?
Probably the best way, my direct number is 608-250-9617, or email is ann.davidson, DAVIDSON, at alliedsolutionswithan.net.
Awesome.
Would love to hear from anybody.
Easy enough.
Brett Johnson, what's new with you? Come on.
Yeah, what's new with me? I mean, I'm getting out of the COVID apathy. You know, it got so bad I kept my head shaved. I'm growing the hair back now. Getting ready to do some conferences. Speaking tomorrow for a couple of groups as well. I did a joint presentation today with the FBI that's going to go with the International Associations of Chiefs of Police in New Orleans in September. But keeping busy, and of course, right now, because of COVID, the pandemic, and everything, fraud and cybercrime in whole is going through the roof. So I'm glad we've got Ann on here to talk to us about this stuff.
No doubt. Tell us about the topic with the FBI. What was that about? You had mentioned something previously.
Sure, it was about attackers, and one of the things we talked about are the different types of attackers out there. But we also talked about ransomware. Ransomware is going crazy right now. It's you hit Kaseya, and it depends on who you're listening to as to how many machines it hits. According to Kaseya, it's 1,500 machines. According to the group that hit Kaseya, it's 1 million machines. So, and I tend to believe, I got to be honest with you, I tend to believe the criminals on that count. So
Right.
that's just me. And that's one of the things I wanted to talk to you about, Ann, is I'm friends with a lot of security professionals. I've built up a good name for myself by not breaking the law.
Thank you.
I'm glad not to do it, I'll tell you that. But I was talking to, the question came up a few weeks ago, why haven't financial institutions really been hit with ransomware? And the answer came back, well, they have been. It's just not talked about a lot. They have been, but the bigger ones, not really as much. So I reached out to one of the major banks and I asked them that question, and the answer came back, well, we've got good cybersecurity practices and a lot of luck. And that scares me. If you're relying on luck to not be attacked and to fend off an attack, that scares me a great deal at that point. I just wanted to get your input on that.
Oh, I agree with you, Brett, 100%. I mean, look back at SolarWinds. I mean, that was uncovered by one of the vendors. Their system party identified a duplicate phone number of an employee.
Right.
And that kind of broke that case open. But, I don't know if people really understand that they need to have someone in there to be watching their shop. It's kind of like a smoke detector, is going to tell you, is the toast burning? Is the house on fire? What's going on? Same thing with ransomware. Have someone in there to check all the bells and whistles to make sure someone hasn't invited themselves in to attack. So,
and I've got I've got people that got friends of mine that work with ransomware protection companies, some of the negotiation companies as well. And I was talking to this friend of mine, and he said, we were talking about ransomware because it's been on my mind. We've been talking about it, and he was telling me, it's like, a lot of these companies, they've got plans in place in case they're hit or when they're hit, because it's not in case they're hit, it's when they're hit. So they've got plans in place when they're hit, but they never test them. And so they're hit with ransomware. They've got the backups properly, off site somewhere. And then they start to reinstall the system, and they realize that they've got 49 petabytes of data, and going across a copper line, it's going to take 60 years to re-up everything.
Right.
So that's one of the issues. Or they don't test everything, and the backups are properly done and everything else like that. But then the tool to reinstall the backups is encrypted with the ransomware. And we were talking about, this idea that you've got these things in place, but you never test anything. You never make sure everything's working properly before you're hit. And I mean, it's scary, Ann. It's scary when you think about it.
And like you were saying, the testing is so critical. Think of all the different transaction risks today. If you're not testing, I mean, it's huge. I just had a backup vendor who had $1 million default set for ACH credits going out the door. Now, just think if that financial institution had $1 million, wouldn't you test your limits before you turn it on? Any type of product or service.
Yeah. So it's scary, and the reason I said that is we're talking about fraud today, and cybercrime as a whole is holistic and all that. But what I touched on today with the FBI presentation is, we've got fraudsters or cyber criminals now that, because of the pandemic, we had everything shuts down in March of last year, and criminals became rich, hitting the unemployment system, and they started to look at areas they had never really looked at before. So you mentioned SolarWinds. You got that supply chain attack. It had never really been attacked before. Then you hit Kaseya. You hit infrastructure that you'd never really hit before. You hit Colonial Pipeline, and it seems to me that we're now in this new kind of dynamic of cybercrime, where criminals are understanding that if they're more patient, that they're going to profit more, that they're going to be more successful. But not only more patient, but they're also looking at these areas where they've never really looked at before. They're looking to innovate. And I think that when I was like that. I was this big innovator at that point in time. But now we've got the majority of cyber criminals that are looking at innovation. And I think that right there is going to be just a nightmare for the good guys.
Oh, definitely. It's like, testing, like you had mentioned, Brett, what's turned on and what's turned off. And I'm seeing a lot of this came up with the COVID, because they're doing everything in a non-face-to-face environment as they do their transactions today. And one that you might get a kick out of is, years ago, back in 2001, verified by Visa, MasterCard Secure Code, they developed an online tool for card transactions in a card not present environment. But 50% of the financials said, oh, we don't need that. Nobody shops online. Let's go to fast forward of 2020.
It's pretty bad.
It came out of the woodwork. They found out they didn't have the security in place because they never monitored it from 2001 until 2020. And then they just saw tons of fraud in a card not present environment.
I
Scary.
think that's what, yeah, with COVID, as we all know, in the pandemic, it was a springboard for digital banking, across the industry, right? If you had it on the back seat, it got pushed forward. You're going to stay in business. You had to have more digital means for transactions for your customers. And boy, were the fraudsters, just lying and waiting for that. And the same with ransomware, as you were talking about. I mean, it's a gateway for vulnerability, right? If they think you're vulnerable in one area, give the analogy of the burglar, right? He's going to test a window. One window looks open, might just assume that the door's open as well. They're going to seek those opportunities. I think and you've probably seen it, where financial institutions primarily struggle is they're responding to regulatory constraints and demands. So the regulators are saying, this is important, this is where you have to put your attention. Then all eyes are on that topic. Nobody's saying anything, then maybe luck's working in your favor. But you wouldn't want to bet on luck. Not today. Things move too quickly. And so taking a holistic approach, or trying to devote, how many financial institutions we talk to on a regular basis that don't even have a dedicated fraud department. They have fraud being shared in multiple areas of the organization. Somebody regulatory compliance. Oh yeah, we also take care of fraud for you. Or
Right.
Worse, they're just relying completely on their card processor as a mitigation approach to fraud. But it really has to be a full holistic approach. If you're working with your IT department on ransomware vulnerabilities and other cybersecurity concerns, that should be in conjunction. And Ann, I'm sure you'd agree, it should be in conjunction with what you're doing on the transactional side for fraud. But oftentimes that's too siloed across the organization.
Well, I mean,
Right.
that's the problem, right? I mean, on paper, that siloed approach is outstanding. But in practice, you've got a bunch of fraudsters who really understand that, hey, what we do is you look at the silos and you defraud each silo based on their own merit. And then you use all that together to commit the fraud that you want to commit. That's how synthetic fraud works. That's why synthetic fraud is so damn successful out there, is because you've got that siloed approach and fraudsters know how to use it against it.
Right. The synthetic is huge today.
Yeah.
And we're seeing a lot of it with the it's account opening. How are they opening the account? And with COVID, were people walking in the door? No, the financials were closed. So online attacks. You know, how were they opening that account and how were they authenticating that information? And then how were they funding it to open it? That's what was
Exactly.
really scary.
Exactly. So think about that. Think about that for a second. You've got an institution. And let's talk about COVID. You've got the unemployment system. I mean, you had the stimulus, you had the EIDL, you had the SBA, you had the PPP, and then you had the PUA, the unemployment. They went to the unemployment because that's the easiest mechanism to launder out, right? You can have $2 million deposited to that bank account. That doesn't mean you're getting $2 million out, but you can have $10,000 deposited from the unemployment system. Are you going to get 10K out? Oh, yes, you are. And that crime scales beautifully at that point. Now, the problem, and I've been thinking about it, I put a lot of thought into this. So you had, well, I gave an interview and I said in the interview, I'm the only fraudster who didn't become rich last year. And it's true. It's true. Because every fraudster, if you were a fraudster of any merit whatsoever, you knew what to hit was unemployment because the states were basically giving the money away at that point. And then what happens? The states, after 6 months, October, the states decide, oh well, we're going to institute some security. Did they do it properly though? No, they didn't. It took them another 6 months to take the proper approach of looking at data. Instead, what they did is they went through verification procedures that fraudsters had been bypassing for years. For years. They went through the KBA. Well, guess what? Fraudsters know how to answer KBA questions. They've been doing that since 2001. Then they went through, well, we're going to need document scans. Well, that was 1999 that you were sending in document scans to bypass the PayPal security that they had going on. Then they went through, well, we need the selfie with the ID. Well, you go down to secondeyeSolution.cm, I think is what the extension is now, and you can get some idiot to take a picture of a snapshot with a fake ID. So they had all that going through. Then they had the liveness detection. Well, it turned out that, guess what? Well, the only thing you had to do was print a 3D mask, and it would bypass that. So you had all that, and it took them all that while they were going through the verification procedures, and they never looked at the data. The data, which is if they would have taken that holistic approach, like Sam mentioned a minute ago, that holistic approach towards security of having data lead everything and then add in the verification measures, would it have taken a bite out of fraud? Maybe. Maybe.
You know, Brett, we saw so much unemployment insurance benefit fraud. And it started with the states. I mean, the states, their FI was the ODFI, the originating depository financial. Well, the financial institutions receiving it were the RDFIs. They don't warrant the risk, but a lot of them didn't understand the rules and regulations. So they were sending money back when they didn't have to. You know,
it's crazy.
Right. Yeah.
I mean,
and then they introduced the card for the unemployment. Wow.
So think of that. So you've got the reason fraudsters didn't hit the Paycheck Protection Program is exactly what I said. You could defraud the government of $2 million, but to get the money out means that you have to have a bank account where you can withdraw the money. They didn't have that. The reason you read about these idiots being arrested on paycheck protection fraud is because they had that $2 million deposited to their own bank account. That bank account's got to be aged to get that money out. It's got to have traffic on it. That's why these fraudsters didn't hit that. They couldn't get the $2 million out. So they went to unemployment fraud. They went to a system who had never seen that type of fraud before. They didn't know what it looked like. And they ate it alive. And it turns out that the tools that were needed to defraud the unemployment system were the exact same tools that these fraudsters had been using when they were committing credit card fraud. Wow.
Definitely. Wow. And limits. I mean, daily dollar limits has been a huge risk management tool to help mitigate and prevent the exposure. I mean, limit the risk. I mean, if it happens, don't let everything go out the door.
And you just said it. Well, so, fraudsters, they were using.
Well, they're taking them right to the limits, which is another aspect. Yeah. We had a client in Florida who, now mind you, they're the on the deposit side of that PPP stuff. So they're not losing the money, but somebody's losing the money, right?
Yeah,
Federal
somebody
government's
is.
taking it, yeah. But they were able to use our search mechanisms and the analytics to identify these transactions, these deposits that were coming in.
Yeah.
And look, in 1 month, something like $560,000 worth of fraudulent PPP loans in 1 month. And
1 month.
so that, but here's the point I wanted to make about that institution. They may not have been taking the losses, but they were taking the steps to identify the fraud. It's still their members in this case who are depositing those funds. So if they may not be taking the money from them, but if they're going to, if they're willing to commit a fraudulent act within your institution from a deposit standpoint, you can bet they're going to come back and they're going to attempt it on the other side. You're going to lose money.
And it allows
eventually.
you entry, right? I mean, so you've defrauded the stimulus program, but now you've got entry to the bank.
Right.
At that point, what can you do? Well, you can do a lot of stuff at that point. And that's what people don't understand is that it's that opportunistic way to commit crime. You start committing crime here, you gain entry to something. What else can you do? What other damage can you do? How else can you profit? And that becomes the issue. And that's this holistic approach that we need to understand. It's not, I like the idea on paper of silos, but protection, real security comes in basically the title of the book. It takes a village. It takes a village. It takes everybody together to be secure.
And tell me a little bit about what you're doing in that front, because I know you're out consulting on that piece. How are you approaching the clients and trying to get them to embrace that holistic mindset?
I think a lot of the financial institutions are looking at the whole enterprise risk management, the holistic, and within enterprise risk management, there's a fraud section. I mean, fraud is, it would wrap up to the ERM. So fraud strategy is one of the 7 key arms of ERM. So when I say fraud, it could be loan fraud, it could be employment fraud, it could be transaction fraud, any type of internal fraud, the embezzlements. So it's like wrapping it up so you see it from a centralization. And that's why, Sam, I have to tell you, ToolCASE, the informant, it's great because it's real time. It comes in at the core data processing level and it sees it from a holistic viewpoint. There's nobody in the industry that has a solution that can help our financial institutions address that piece of it. So
I mean, it's pretty damn good when you get down to it.
Yes.
No, I appreciate it, and and of course we're always working to evolve and further benefit the clients. One of the things that we're doing now, Brett, you'll find this interesting too. So ToolCASE, and I don't want to get into a ToolCASE informant pitch, but the reality is with the real-time data streaming, which as Ann mentioned it's an anomaly today. There aren't many folks that can do that, but being able to pull data and aggregate data across those different silos is critical. So you can look at the online banking, you can look at just the card activity alone, the information that lives in that feed from that file from your card processor holds a lot of really interesting data. But too many institutions pass that off to a third party, it's their card processors, and rely on them to analyze that. But what the card processor doesn't know is what the rest of the relationship with that customer looks like within that institution. But we can see that kind of data. We can analyze on that kind of data. What we're doing now that's interesting is we're reversing the engineering back into historical data and applying the AI and the analytics back on historical data as well. So
I like it.
Nobody wants to, it's not pleasant to go back and see what you lost that you didn't know about, but it's very helpful when you can start to identify it. So
it's
now
very informative.
It is, right. But that's another piece to learning on this concept. And of course, then you add the AI to this and you can, and the neural net technology, and you can start to create more preparedness for moving forward. But Ann, you mentioned, we see organizations now that ERM title or designation starting to evolve more and more throughout financial institutions. But it's certainly not an adopted practice across the industry.
Right.
Things are certainly still very siloed in the way they manage. Are you also out consulting on the organizational benefit of developing that type of an approach?
Yeah, definitely. And one thing that we use as a commonality is change of address. If you have 10 different departments doing a change of address, why not centralize it? Because then those individuals will see the common threads. So it's once they understand that, then you take it to that next level. You know, what type of fraud are you seeing? Because if they're doing ACH, if they're doing wire, if they're doing cards, paper checks, centralize it, because then your employees are going to be so powerful. And then, like I said, with the informant solution, you know, in real time, it can see all that data. So it's going to be huge. The thing that we definitely are seeing a lot of right now is payment app fraud. And in the industry, there's no regulation. There's no compliance. And we're seeing scams versus fraud. So we're getting requests from financial, yes.
So I do this thing when I give a presentation. I talk about the 3 necessities of cybercrime, how it breaks down into gathering data, committing crime, and then laundering the cash. All right, and typically what we see a lot of on laundering cash is prepaid debit card usage. All right, a lot of that. What I advise, and what really ticks me off is that you've got Visa, MasterCard. They don't like companies to keep a bin list. But to me, a bin list is a lot of information. If you're able, as a retailer, as a merchant, if you're able to look at the bins that are coming in and understand that, you know, this bin is a prepaid debit card, that's a lot of information to have, especially if you're looking at, like right now, merchants are being eaten alive with refund fraud. So if you're able to look and see that the debit cards that are being used, the bins that are being used to commit refund fraud are prepaid cards, it seems to me that would be one of these flags that would be kind of important. Yet Visa and MasterCard, they kind of forbid merchants to do that. Now I know that some merchants do that anyway because it's the smart thing to do. But I'd like your input on that. What do you think about these companies that, you know, you've got a tool that would really help to counter fraud, and yet the company, you know, the issuer doesn't want you to do that?
Yeah, you are right on, Brett. We saw it with the gift cards. You know, when Visa and MasterCard rolled out gift cards, they didn't create a merchant category code. You know, like online gambling or face-to-face gambling, it's a unique code, 7995. Gift cards, nothing. So how do you manage that risk? You would look at it and say, oh, if it's an even dollar transaction, oh, it might be a gift card. But, you know, as an advocate of these financial institutions, we work directly with Visa, MasterCard, Discover, and really you almost have to get in their face and say, enough is enough. Someone has to be that holistic global advocate to help mitigate this risk. And that's what it's getting to with, you know, these payment apps, the Zelle, the Venmo, the Cash App, Apple Cash, you know, Facebook Cash. Discover has a unique merchant category code for that type of fraud, 7299. But Visa and MasterCard have the 4829, and it's money transfer. Money transfer is a high risk. So that, you know, you can do it down the ACH rails where we've seen losses at 350,000 and more because no limits are in place, or they go down the card rails, the debit card rails. So you could go out and download the Venmo or the Zelle app and get me to give you my 16-digit debit card, and you can enroll it. And that's considered a card not present transaction. And you have chargeback rights against the merchant if it's fraud. But if you're getting scammed, guess what? The individual's out their money. So we're seeing a lot of that. In the prepaid cards, a lot of financials are leery about even offering those because of the regulations. And
I mean, you can understand it.
Yeah, I don't blame them one bit.
What are you seeing right now? And there was an article that popped up on LinkedIn a couple of months back that talked about credit card theft. And from what it's been a while since I've talked. It's been a while since I've talked about credit card theft. So what are you seeing about CMP fraud, about credit card fraud, everything else right now?
Yeah, I would say we probably see more debit card fraud than credit card fraud.
Why do you think
Credit
that
card
is?
fraud has higher limits, but here's what we've been seeing in the last, I would say, year and a half, 2 years, is when the chip was rolled out back 10/1/2015, point of sale, the shift in the chargebacks. Well, guess
Right.
what? All these financial institutions on the issuer side, they allowed fallback. They said, oh, well, the chip isn't reading properly or the chip isn't working. Well, you know what the bad actor's doing? They're putting a fake chip on that card and it
That's what
converts
I
to a
would
make
do.
strike. Yeah. Why allow it to fall back? I have a financial institution right now, $900,000 of fallback fraud. If I was running a financial institution, I would be blocking fallback at an automated teller machine. I don't care if it's Sam's card coming through or Brett, your card coming through the financial institution who owns that ATM. No, if it's chip on chip, why allow it to convert to make stripe? And the bad actors
So
will
let
go
me
and
ask you
test
this.
it.
So
Yeah.
you're saying that fallback is still
Oh, it's a gold
possible.
mine.
That's insane, Ann. I mean, that's insane when you think about that.
Oh,
When I
definitely.
first began this career as a legal guy, when I first began that, they were eating that fallback stuff alive. I remember I gave a presentation at a camera conference, spoke to all these camera, retailers and everything else, and they operate on, like, I don't know if you knew this or not, but they operate basically on a 2% margin. So if they're hit with credit card fraud or refund fraud or fallback or anything else like that, I mean, the chances of them going out of business pretty good at that point. So I mean, they were really worried about that. And I was, back then, and they would tell me, we get these fraudsters come in and they'll, the card will be put in the microwave or the chip will be scratched up so it won't read or any number of things like that. And they try to trick us into swiping the card. And I think a lot of people don't understand, unless you're a merchant, if it's got a chip and you swipe, guess who pays for the bill?
From an organizational standpoint, I still see the disconnects, and
Yeah.
I think that the financial side of the house, CFOs may not know the exact correlation between what's happening on the balance sheet with fraud and, like, and you mentioned, how much was that lost? 900 and some
900,000. Yeah.
900 some. But I bet when you turn around and you hand them a higher deductible or a higher premium, you got their attention, right?
Yes.
And that's the disconnect, right? They're not seeing the relative cost or expense to the balance sheet. You're a camera company working on 2% margin. You don't have a lot to play with.
You don't.
And I think this is where there's still a lot of opportunity for education and where I commend what you both are doing for institutions, financial institutions, as our clients in particular, and educating them on these other philosophical methodologies that they can take in place that they may not be thinking of. Because back to the silos, right? CFO's worried about the bottom line. He's looking at margins. You ask somebody for a report on fraud, they give you a number and they say, here's what we're losing. You turn around, you budget for that
Yep.
next year and you buffer for it. And then, the bond folks walk in and say, well, because of that, here's a higher deductible. Sorry, you're going to have to pay more on your premium, and insurance goes up. But the power lies within the institution. If you're in the hot seat and the loss is on you, whether it's through chargeback rights that are not in place, or it's card fraud that you're offloading to a card processor, you're still empowered to make those decisions and to take control. But it does take some focus and some reorganization. I know I've been beating that drum, but I think we're all up against it. I suspect the industry's starting to come together. They're deploying organizational responsibilities like enterprise risk management, and IT departments are maybe now more involved in what's happening on the fraud side, looking at not just what's potentially risk from a cyber standpoint, but understanding that vulnerability may be exploited another way, because that's what those guys are learning on the dark web, right?
Yeah.
Right. Yeah. Brett, you had mentioned about bins. We are
Right.
the other piece that we're seeing a lot of bin attacks. We haven't seen those for probably 20 plus years, where cards were issued in sequential order. It's like a dialing system. Bing, 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 bing. It gives you the next card number. Guess
Right.
what? I have talked to 4 or 5 different card processors. They are giving the financial the option of issuing their card numbers in sequential order. We are seeing
Oh my
bin.
God.
Right. It's been unbelievable. But they think it's going to be the next digit. I said it could be 15 digits for the next card number. But yeah, that has come back with the chip, because again, people aren't testing. They're not finding out what they have in place or what they don't have in place. And now they're in this sequential card issuance attack again.
That is absolutely insane. I mean, that is absolutely insane.
I just had a financial with 500 cards.
The only thing you got to do is look back at Tesco 2016, was it?
Yeah. Wow.
I mean, that's all you got to do.
So dot your I's, cross your T's.
Geez.
Oh.
I thought that you were going to say, I honestly did. I thought you were going down the path where you're going to say that if you look a few years ago, Amex got hit with, they had this algorithm that was easily deciphered by fraudsters. So what was going on is you would go to the dark web, you would buy someone's Amex card, you'd commit CNP fraud on it, they would close the card down. Then Amex would issue a new card, and before that card arrived at the address, it already had fraud on it. The reason why is it was pretty easy to figure out the algorithm. I thought you were going to go down that path, but no, you're going down the sequential path of madness.
Yes.
Insane.
And that is huge today. I mean, we had a fraud and risk roundtable, and this financial institution there, they said, well, on their application form with the card processor, do you want your card numbers in sequential order or random? Wow.
You see, that goes back to that whole thing. And I've seen it time and time again. I saw it when I was a fraudster. I see it now that I'm working with companies to help prevent fraud. You forget your history is what it is. You get the new fraud tool in, and it's new kid on the block. It's getting all the hype, everything else, and you forget all the old fraud that used to take place. Meanwhile, fraudsters don't forget that. Fraudsters are sitting there going, I wonder if this old technique would work again. Turns out it does.
It sure does.
So, like, what the hell?
The peaks and valleys. I mean, same way with key entered fraud. Why would you ever allow a merchant in a face-to-face environment key enter that 16-digit card number when we're in the technology of chip? Why?
Face-to-face, why would you ever do that? Why?
Right.
What purpose is there in that?
Right. So we see that too, but I just thought you would get a kick out of the bin attacks.
Oh yeah.
It just keeps lining up. But I get it. Right out of convenience for the consumer, for the client, you're trying to make things easier. There opens the vulnerability, and you could bet that somebody's going to be sitting there waiting to exploit it and do it quickly.
And I don't want to spend all day on, because there's a couple other topics I wanted to talk about. I want to spend all day on card stuff, but you really did get me. You really did get me on the sequential stuff, because I complain about that a lot on Tesco. Now to just find out that they're saying, to hell with it. Y'all want them sequential. That's fine. That's crazy. That's crazy. What do you
crazy?
Let's leave it at crazy. What are you seeing about synthetic? Because synthetic took a little pause when COVID hit and all the fraudsters became rich on stimulus. But what do you see on synthetic these days?
Well, synthetic, they're extremely creative, because they go and get those private branded cards to build a very, very high credit score. And so their credit scores are, 750, 800 and beyond. And but the 3 credit bureaus, they have a solution to help monitor synthetic ID theft. And a lot of financials don't realize that they could have that tool in place and not let the synthetic person in their doors.
So
So
what
they
is
should
the
be
tool?
looking. Well, if you go out to, and I'll just name like TransUnion and Experian, they have a synthetic fraud model that looks at when was that Social Security issued. They check the date of birth. With that, they have a lot of different parameters and rules in place to help catch that at the front end versus with ID theft when it's a real person.
Right.
And
So
they're
let me
able.
ask you this, because
Yeah.
of course, 2011, Social Security Administration, they randomize the numbers, and that's what creates kind of this pandemic
Yeah.
of synthetic fraud, because you can use a child's social, you can use a
Yeah.
fabricated social as well. Now, my understanding is that up until recently, you weren't able to cross-reference the issue date of the social with the actual file that was going on. Now, the Social Security Administration, they're allowing that now. I think is it still in testing phase, or is it actually out in the wild now? Do you know?
I don't know if it's out there, but what has been extremely beneficial for synthetic is the free freeze.
Sure.
The free
Sure, absolutely.
freeze that
It
was
works.
offered it works. I mean, I know under 16, you have to provide additional information to do that free freeze, but tell every consumer, put the free freeze on your account with all 3 credit bureaus, and
Right.
you're not going to have bits and pieces of your information taken to create a synthetic person that doesn't exist.
I mean, that's true. It's credit freezes became free September 18th, 2018. That's the date they became free.
Correct.
The interesting thing, I don't know if you knew the actual percent, but the percent of the population that has the credit freeze in place is about 12%.
No kidding.
Yeah.
They
And
don't
really,
understand it.
that freeze was a result of some bad experience, right?
Yeah,
Yes.
yeah, really, really bad experiences, and
Yeah.
it works great to stop new account fraud. Works great against synthetic
So
fraud.
12%,
12%.
lots
12%.
of room for improvement. And if you're a financial institution out there, you want to do some added value customer
I guess what I'm,
care. Educate a little bit
you
on
know,
the freeze or incentivize the freeze approach.
yeah, yeah,
Every
and one of the
webinar I
things that
do, I talk about free freezes, for
you
the
should,
last couple of years. Oh,
yeah,
definitely.
you
And
should,
people say,
absolutely.
well, is it going to take me a lot of time? I said, if you're over 16, it takes less than 10 minutes.
Right, right. Now, on synthetic, so because we are getting to the point where Social Security Administration is going to allow the cross-referencing. So using children's identification to do synthetic profiles, that's going to kind of go out the window. The use of fabricated socials, that's going to kind of disappear too. So what do you think the next innovation on synthetic fraud is going to be?
Well, I think you need these tools in place. You need some type of fraud monitoring system that's going to look at different rules and strategies to catch it. I mean, it's not going to be just flipping a switch. It's got to have some, kind of going back to the card fraud when they first developed, as you probably know, Sam, the neural network, they called it,
Yep.
the fast forward. And that's why these 3 credit bureaus have developed it. And I'll tell you, they're very impressive, the tools they have in catching it.
Well, it's all data, right? I mean, you look at the data,
Yep.
and it turns out that the data tends to point you in the right direction on what you need to be looking at.
Yeah, it prevents it, prevents it
That's
from
right.
happening.
And the simple
Yeah,
stuff
and
like the sequential things you're mentioning, I mean, that's a model, right? And these models repeat
right.
themselves. We
Yeah.
can analyze those things and detect on those. But yeah, you got to deploy them.
Yeah, one
Yep.
of the things with with synthetic that I've seen is, of course, right now you're still using stolen children's, you're using fabricated socials. That's going out the window. And one of the interesting things that I've seen is from the good guy side, you've got financial institutions that have problems identifying what is synthetic versus what is traditional identity theft. Fraudsters don't think of it like that. They don't.
Right.
They think of it as a profile. Is it a created profile? Is it an existing profile? It's still a profile. They don't really consider it synthetic versus traditional. And I think what a lot of the issue is you've got a bank that will identify it as synthetic. Meanwhile, a different bank on the other side of the street will identify it as traditional identity theft, and the two simply are on different pages altogether. They can't even carry on a proper conversation because they're not identifying it correct. And the reason I bring that up is because I'm thinking what we're going to see is that as synthetic is, as the Social Security Administration and these tools are put into place, we're going to get to the point where this idea of synthetic is more and more obscured, and it's pointing more back toward traditional type of identity theft. And that's why I wanted to talk to you about the next thing is, what about new account fraud?
Oh, new account fraud, because of COVID, the financials were not open for someone to join the financial institution. So online fraud, just new account online opening was huge. And a lot of the financials are actually accepting the application and then reviewing it. So they're not giving an immediate approval for a new account opening. So we do see a lot of, how they've changed their parameters for online account opening. Just like with the synthetic, to throw this in, we're seeing a lot of the financials uncover this at collection time. They're seeing where they have all these loans in default and they can't find the individuals. And I tell them, if you would have done something up front before they got into your door, you wouldn't be having all these losses at the tail end, to try to collect when the person doesn't exist. So it's all about the front end. And Brett, you would get a kick out of this. We're finding more and more of the bad actors out there acting as the financial institution's fraud department.
I could see that.
They are telling everyone, we are the fraud department. Send when that 6-digit code, when they want to change something on their account, that 6-digit code goes out. The bad actor is right there calling them saying, oh, you got to repeat and give me that 6-digit code. And
Sure.
So our financials are sending out within a second another email or text saying, never, never, never give out that code. We would never, never, never ask for it. So that has been very, very powerful to prevent that exposure.
Because that's exactly what you'd do is you're looking at, if you've got some sort of multi-factor in place where you're sending out a code or something like that, if you've not taken over, done some sort of SIM swap or something like that, you've got to get the code. So how do you get it? Yeah. No easier way than to spoof the phone number of the financial institution, call in and say, hey, we're about to send you a code. What is it?
You bet.
Yeah,
I saw like a charm.
In an email, representing Walmart's fraud department.
Yeah.
I could see that.
I'll tell you.
They were doing that with unemployment. Same thing.
Yeah. They wanted the consumer to go to the local Walmart, make a payment on that fraudulent transaction so they could reverse it and take it off. But first you had to come in and settle it. It's amazing. Consumers certainly are up against it. I think they got to be tired of having to live so suspiciously, and obviously, would look to their financial institution to show some competency and concern for what's happening. I think one of the worst positions you can be in as an FI is getting the phone call from your consumer that there's been fraud on their account and you not being privy or aware of the fact. You see those conversations misguided all over social media, where somebody's on, chattering about their bank, how they just had fraud and it was the financial institution's fault. You don't want to be in that position.
No, you don't. You don't want to be that
Sam,
guy.
that's very interesting. We are getting more and more requests to do education for the entire consumer membership on scams versus fraud. to help educate the consumer that the financial isn't doing this just because they want to do it. They're trying to prevent you from being ripped off.
I think
So
that
I find that
that's a great strategy and a great compliment to business. But I would make sure that internally you've got yourself tightened up and you're doing what you can do, and not just laying it on the consumer.
I agree. And just to feed into what you're saying there, Sam, I think this is a really good conversation we're having to this, especially this holistic approach. Because I've been kind of down on the silos for a bit, because it's been all about defrauding each silo and then committing whatever fraud you're going to commit.
Right.
And that holistic approach, data driven, is what makes the difference. It really does. And you know, you're talking about scams and fraud. I mean, there's a victim, that telephone fraud victim. She's convinced to go down to Sephora. True story. She's convinced to go down to Sephora and buy $30,000 worth of gift cards. And she does.
Wow.
She buys $30,000 worth of Sephora gift cards. I see all kinds of things wrong with that. The first is, yes, the victim should have taken a pause, thought about it. Does that seem reasonable and rational? No, it doesn't. Not going to do it. That's the first thing. But the big problem that I have with that is that she walks into Sephora and they sell her $30,000 worth of gift cards. It seems to me that someone wasn't trained there. And not only do we see at the retail level, we see that same type of behavior at the financial institution level.
Yep.
You know, you come in, somebody is obviously a victim of romance scheme fraud. And they come in, they want to withdraw every single penny, or they want to initiate a wire transfer to Egypt, Nigeria, Ghana, wherever the hell the fraudster is. And more often than not, you see that the customer service or whoever it is at the bank that's doing the wire transfer for them is like, oh yeah, we can do that for you. And it seems to me it's that holistic approach again. We have to act as a village in order to protect everyone. Just because you've got a victim out there that wants to send your money out or wants to buy all these gift cards or whatever that is, if you understand, if you've been trained properly, you're going to sit there and say, you know, not today. I'm not going to sell you these gift cards. Or there's a bank in Texas where a woman walks into the facility and she wants to withdraw all of her money and send it out. And the bank refused. They asked the proper questions. They identified her as a victim or a potential victim of a romance scheme. And they said, you know, hey, we're not going to do that today. And she got mad. She threatened to call the police and everything else. But you know what? The bank held its ground and said, you know, not today, not today. And I think that's the approach that we have to have, is we have to act as a team to stop this stuff.
Definitely, Brett. I have our financials bring out the ARP magazine, the AARP, because they have some really good articles on the romance scams and getting scammed, and say, read this. You're not just hearing it from us, the financial institution, it's in the industry. So that's been pretty successful. It kind of opens their eyes.
Yeah, I mean, the numbers really live demographically with the 65 and older, and now the 25 and younger. You know, they're being exploited, mostly. I want to thank you guys for joining, but before we wrap up, I'd really be interested to get perspective from each of you. If you take a minute and think, we're talking to our financial institution clients today. If you could give just 3 best practices from either of your perspectives on what they might be able to do to help mitigate the fraud or reduce those losses, what would they be?
And you want to go first? You want me to go first?
Oh, doesn't matter.
You go first.
Okay, I'll jump in. I was going to say that the first thing is education. I mean, education, if I could say anything, it's educate the employees, but also your customers or members. You know, it's a 2-prong there. The second thing, if you don't know, check into it. Don't just make assumptions. That would be a best practice. You know, if something doesn't seem right, check into it. Don't just go forward. And the third thing is, reach out to people in the industry that can help you. You know, there are many players out there that can help you. Don't just respond with a win just because you think you have to get a response back. Reach out and find out if others are getting hit with the same fraud or scam. So that's
I like it,
people.
and I'm going to say we're pretty much on the same page. I do agree that training is paramount. Education. You have to educate not only your workforce, the people who you've got working for you, from the ground up, from the person who sweeps the floor to the person who signs the checks. Everyone has to be educated, but you also have to educate your customers. You've got to do that. You've got to do that, and you've got to work as a team on that. The second thing I would say is something you said too. It's looking at the data. The data is not going to lie to you, but you have to be able to look at data in real time. You have to see what's going on in your entire environment as it's going on.
Yeah.
If you're not able to do that, you are asking to be victimized. And it is not a question of if, it's always a question of when it's going to happen. And it's usually a question of, this is not your first go around, is it? So that's the next thing. And then finally, with me, it's trust but verify. I'm not the guy. I used to commit crime. Lord knows I did. I served prison time for it. But I'm not the guy that believes in living in fear. I don't think that we need to do that. I think that we need to trust, but we need to verify every single thing that we see in our lives. All those news stories, there's a reason fake news is so popular. You're not verifying anything. Those phone scams, there's a reason those phone scams work. I'm going to tell you what, if a phone scam, if it showed on a caller ID that it was a scammer, would you fall for that? No, you wouldn't. But if it shows that it's the IRS, maybe you need to verify that. So trust but verify at the end of the day. That's my 3 right there.
I like it. I think you guys are definitely in concert.
Fantastic.
You know, the education piece, certainly for those listening, you know, both with the employees and your consumer base, and there are resources for that. Ann mentioned that she's starting to get, you know, calls and interest in being able to provide those tips to the front line. Allied Solutions obviously out doing their part to consult their customers. If you guys are not an Allied Solutions client, look into them, get the extra training. Education from an organizational standpoint on what you can do to, you know, prevent cybercrime, become more aware of where those vulnerabilities are. Brett Johnson, Anglerfish is your man. Help with that. And
Can I say
Brett,
one more thing, Sam?
you may go.
I am so jealous of your beard.
It's taken a bunch of years for it to happen. Thank you. I wanted to say the other piece that you mentioned. You know, I heard you reference it a couple times in the episode today, and that's the data. And I think what folks may not understand is you already own the data. You have the data. It's there. You just need to be able to break down those silos, find a solution that can aggregate that data, can analyze that data, put the right type of intelligence on it, use the analytics necessary to get the information, but you own the data. So it's just a matter of utilizing what's available to you. And it may not just be your data internally, it may be data that's living with one of your other vendors through online banking. We mentioned credit card processors. So there's lots of means. Take a look at the data, find a tool that can aggregate like ours and bring that data to life for you, even visually, you know, from perspective. But lots of great information. I want to thank both you guys. I'd love to get together again. I think one thing's for certain, this world of fraud is going to continue to evolve and change, and we'll be talking about it more. So there's a darn good chance that sometime in the near future we'll have new topics to discuss. But folks that are listening, go out and visit Allied Solutions and give Ann Davidson a call if you have questions, and my good friend Brett Johnson at Anglerfish. Lots of information shared publicly. I see on LinkedIn and other references today. Brett, keep doing the good work. Glad you're on our side.
I am too. And pleasure talking to you.
You too, Brett. Thank you.
Thanks,
And
folks.
thank you. Thank you.
Learn more about the ToolCASE suite of real-time AI products and how to protect your institution from fraud today.